From iAfrikan Media, this is iAfrikan BYTES, a podcast that features commentary on African news, insights, opinions, and analysis with tech industry leaders and professionals. The podcasts are from interviews conducted by the iAfrikan team, whether at events or when needed for commentary. I'm Bataon Kozokwane, host and editor-in-chief for iAfrikan.com, spelled www.iafrikan.com. Proximity Ventures, an Australian venture capital firm, is actively and intentionally investing in African tech startups. In fact, their African-focused publication, Tech Safari, provides a knowledge center of data and insights on the African startup ecosystem. Now, in this episode of iAfrikan BYTES, we're joined by the man at the helm of this engine, Caleb Maru, to explain why is Africa the perfect investment destination. Southern African BYTES. Brother Caleb, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Brother Caleb, let's start here. You're a native of Australia. What's the fascination with Africa and African tech? Since you've got you've got Tech Safari and you've got Proximity VC that, intentionally invest in African startups.
Yeah, great question. So I'm a native Australian, but my parents moved over here right before they had me from Ethiopia. So growing up, I spent heaps of time back home, back in Ethiopia, spending time with family. And then after I finished uni, the first thing I did was I started working in Ethiopia in peace and security policy. So I feel like my whole career has been in Africa, but my growing up has been in Australia. So I think that's the connection for me. And I'm just kind of obsessed with the continent. There's every time you visit, the same country, there's more and more and more to see. The people are beautiful. The innovation and the ingenuity coming from it is so exciting. So to be honest, I call that continent home.
Beautiful, amazing. The patriotism is amazing, and that's what we love. Caleb, now let's look at Proximity VC, being your VC firm that intentionally invests in African startups.
We invest in early stage startups. We've invested in, I think, 18 or 19 startups on the continent now.
Okay.
And just helping them grow, learning a lot from them as well.
You've invested so much in Africa, right? In different regions. Yeah. Which African region presents the most innovation and, tech-powered solutions to invest in?
Whoa, that's also a loaded question, man.
I'm trying to ascertain where the bulk of some people. Where the bulk of your thinking and bulk of your resources are sort of, strategically focused on which parts of Africa.
I see what you're trying to do, but man, people are gonna hate me if I say no. I'm kidding. Because if you choose a region, everyone gets knocky. No, my region's the best. Here's the thing. I think that Africa has very unique problems in different areas, and there's different regions that are known for different things. You think about the South African market and how much more developed that is as a market, right? Compared to Nigeria or even Kenya. You think about Kenya, or East Africa, how mobile money means that people are actually very well versed with fintech. And then you think about Nigeria, where most people use cash, right? And so payments are so big. Every region is different and has a completely different sort of history, which means a very different reality now for the types of solutions that they need. But in the way that we think about different markets is we think that Africa as a continent is going to have some really incredible unicorns. Those unicorns aren't very likely to be just in one region. They're probably likely to be fixing a Pan-African problem. So a problem that's represented in a lot of places. And if you just focus on one region, you actually miss out on your potential to find that unicorn because you're only focusing on, say, 1/4 of Africa, like East Africa or Southern Africa. So we think that's why we look across all of Africa, and we look for different things in different regions as well. So hopefully no one hates me after that answer. That was very diplomatic of me. So
I think it's important, Caleb. Let me just, paint the picture because, the body of our listeners that listen to this are right throughout Africa. And I think, other investors are also listening, and it would be great insights to know which part of Africa is mostly good, let's say, for fintech, which part of Africa is mostly, good for, let's say, blockchain investment or whatever the case may be. And I think that understanding of the continent would, I think, open up, a lot of insights and a lot of data for a lot of, big spenders to really put pockets of money in different places across the continent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it really like there's so many different categories of startup you can have, right? So it's hard to
Okay.
just like to pick out what's better for what. But I think when we generally think about, actually, I think on the other side of that, there's quite a few problems that are Pan African, and like
Mhm,
all of Africa has like pretty similar problems in this regard. Like sending money
mhm,
cross border, super hard, super expensive,
mhm,
not easy.
mhm,
It's why you see all these
mhm,
cross-border transfer applications come up that are
mhm,
trying to like really be like the platform you use to move money across borders.
mhm,
What's another space? One space that we're really interested in is construction. Construction is super
mm,
fragmented. Finding
mm,
suppliers, finding, getting your, going from like the person who gets you the cement through to the person who sells the cement to the hardware store, to the hardware store to the individual who will use that to then build the property is super fragmented, and
mhm,
there's so much like you pay a lot for those materials along each step of the journey, right? And so if you fix that problem through tech, you can build a platform that goes straight from supplier to the person who needs it.
mhm,
That's actually a pan-African problem. You have
mm,
companies like Joomba, for instance, in East Africa, like Kenya. Not sure
mhm,
if you saw them, but they raised a big seed round and doing amazing work in Kenya for that. And then you have Cutstruct in Nigeria that's also
mhm,
solving the same problem, but the way they approach it is different because there's different realities on the ground in terms of like who the big players are, who the real like construction companies are, who the developers are. So yeah, I think that there's quite a few problems that are universal. Like anything that comes to SME tooling, so like that we have this theme, which is kind of like arming the businesses, which is like how do you help SMEs become more efficient, have access to credit,
mhm,
have access to the things that they need to thrive, because Africa really is SMEs. Like you think about the backbone of Africa's economy, it's small and medium enterprises. It's like
mhm,
what companies are helping equip them and help them make more money or be more efficient. That's a universal African problem. Like it's hard to get credit. So like
mhm.
companies are doing SME lending, like PayHippo, for instance, is a company in our portfolio that we've invested in that does lending for African small and medium enterprises.
You mentioned paid hippo. Can you run us through some of the other babies, as you call them, that you've invested
Yeah,
in on the continent?
yeah, for sure, for sure. So one that we've invested in that I was speaking to actually last week is called ShipShap. So they fix a really interesting
Hmm.
problem in Africa, right? Like sending a parcel from A to B is like surprisingly excruciatingly difficult. It's like even understanding where to get an
Hmm.
ad, like figuring out the address of most people is really hard. Some people don't even have addresses. Actually, a lot of Africans don't have
Trust me,
addresses,
we know.
right?
We've
So
got
like
the post office. We've got the post office in South Africa. We know the challenges.
it is hard. It is hard. And
Extremely.
it's like, it's not even like, it's just excruciatingly difficult, right? So you want to receive a visa, like your passport or something, you got to send it somewhere. It's super hard to get it and receive it. Imagine you're like actually a business, an e-commerce business that sends parcels all the time. Like your job is hell, right? You're paying actually like
Mm,
70% of the amount that you spend on like that product comes down to logistics. Right? So like things are inherently more expensive. What ShipShap lets you do is they help you essentially find and aggregate the best shipping partner for what you need. They help you print out a label at home, stick it on, and get it either picked up to that location, or they help you like you just take it into the post office and it goes where it needs to. And they've like locked in with like big partners like DHL and Toll to help make that like really seamless for people. And that's really important, right? Like logistics is such a big problem, and that's a company that's doing that.
100%.
I love ShipShap because they're a company that are doing they're asset light in that they're essentially providing software that helps you find the best
Hmm.
solution logistics carrier. Whereas you look at any other logistics company and they're doing like the hard, they're like moving your thing from A to B. Super hard model. We've seen companies like GoCarta and Quick Delivery really struggle with those models.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think like that's one of my favorite companies. They're doing very, very well. I mean, they're all my favorites, but
But
I
come
do
on,
really like
Caleb.
ShipShap.
There's always that shiny. There's always the favorite child in the family.
They were also one of my first investments, so that's why. I
Okay,
think it was like
okay,
my second
okay.
investment, so that's why.
Just to jump in there, I just wanted to find out, did you reach out to them or did they reach out to you? And when you're going through their pitch deck, did they have some sort of traction? Just walk us through the process where you said, you know what, I think they've got something good going on and we're
Yeah.
going to put X amount of money. I'm not sure if you're in a position to disclose how much was the check you wrote to them.
Yeah, I probably won't disclose all the technical stuff, but I can share like how I found them and where we landed. So, like Yeah, with ShipShop, it was interesting. A friend connected us, like the founder, Ethiopian guy, was just like, oh, I want to learn how to I want to take this to the next level. It had been a hobby for him, and he'd been working with Ethiopian e-commerce companies for a while, helping them move goods. And he's like, oh, this is actually a really easy solution. I'm familiar with the US company that's done this. Like his co-founder, Subi, was also the first employee at Shippo, which is Shippo is like the US equivalent. It's a $1 billion company, and so he's essentially built this. So he's like, oh, this is really easy. This is how you build the thing. And they found that it was super valuable in Ethiopia, and so they're like, maybe this has legs outside of Ethiopia, and they bootstrapped it until that point. So I think we were like their second investor ever, and we like really helped them get investor ready. But they were growing the company really well, and they ended up closing a really like a brilliant round with some really good investors, which I don't think I can disclose because it hasn't been announced. Yeah, but like I really like them because it's kind of like this is the best. I think the best way to start a company is like you experience the problem, and you're like, that needs to change. Who's fixing this? No one. Oh, okay, I'll do it. And that's what ShipShop did. Like Eyul had an e-commerce store, which I think was in Ethiopia, and just really struggled to get shipments out of the country at a cheap price. And he fixed his own problem. And then he's like, actually, the rest of Africa needs this. Yeah, so that's how we found them. And I think that's how we like to find companies, like generally quite early, that are building really cool products and solving really hard problems. Like we find that generally the best companies we back are just starting with a hard problem that they've experienced and they're trying to solve it. And our thesis is like, it's not even thematic. It's just like, how do we find the strongest founders that are solving the hardest problems, and the founders that we back to go solve those problems. And ShipShop's a great example of that. So,
for the benefit of our listeners, that was my partner in crime, our operations lead in Zalo. Caleb, let's go into Tech Safari. When was Tech Safari started, and what was the gap, the vacuum you were looking to close with Tech Safari?
yeah, so the story's kind of funny. I was in Africa for the second half of last year, and I was traveling around, and I figured I was learning quite a bit while I was investing and traveling, and I was like, how do I really consolidate my knowledge, and just learn more? I was like, well, the best way to learn is to teach, and so I started writing the things I was learning on LinkedIn and sharing them. And I found that when I was in Africa, I'd take videos of things or take a photo or share something that was happening, and people were like, whoa, what? This exists in Africa? People I knew from the States and Europe and Australia were like, what? Is this a thing? Sometimes it'd be super ignorant questions like, wow, this looks so nice. I didn't realize this was Africa. Other times it would be like, yeah, seriously. And then other times it would be things like, oh, amazing. Africa has a really vibrant tech scene. And I think what I realized was, I was on TechCrunch today, actually, and I was looking at all the articles under Africa. I've got it in front of me. It's like Naspers, Flutterwave, Jumia. It's like a handful of things, like the big tech companies.
The big tech
it's like
companies.
the big firms.
Mm.
But there's no context. So if you read that about Flutterwave, you're like, who the hell's Flutterwave? Why should I care about them?
Yes.
No one's actually explaining what's happening in Africa, just from the grounds up, as if you don't know anything. And so, because I kind of didn't know anything, 2 years ago about African tech, I came from a really cool perspective where I could explain that in just really simple terms. And so, Tech Safari was born from that. I realized there's a pretty big gap, and I could fill that gap by telling stories in ways that anyone can understand. The sort of stress test for my story is I'll tell my 16-year-old brother, hey, does this make sense to you? And he's like, yeah, I get it. And so if he gets it, then the rest of the world should be able to. That's how I started it. And yeah, I started it officially 3 months ago. Yesterday we hit 6,000 subscribers, which is awesome. Have been growing pretty quickly. And just really looking to tell more really exciting stories on the continent, highlight more founders, work with companies to help them grow, and just grow, just really be the platform where the rest of the world learns about and engages with African tech. Because I think the reason that we're underfunded, the reason that there's less attention, the reason that we get all the shitty news is because no one's telling the good stories about how tech is actually changing the continent. And there's way more stories about that than there is positive stories about government or aid. So
look, brother Caleb, from an editorial perspective, I can definitely, when I was going through your platform, I could definitely see the simplicity in you explaining some of the events, some of the companies, some of the figures, the people rather behind the stories. And I think that's what I enjoyed about, as tech people, we tend to be a little bit over verbose, in our jargon, in our way of understanding things, because we take for granted that a lot of people don't know the words and the information that we know. So that's what I really liked about it from editorial. Now you're an Australian oak. I mean, and you're quite plugged in. Where do you get your news? Who are your sources? You go on to other sites, or you're just speaking with other investors? Like, how do you go about amassing all this information?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Australia, but not for long. Like, I'm going to be in Africa for the rest of the year pretty soon.
Okay.
So I just spend quite a bit of time on the continent. But like, yeah, it's generally, I'm pretty lucky in that, like, there's the first level, which is you just look at the news and you see what's happened. The second level, which is like, I spend probably 4 or 5 hours a day just in calls with founders and like investors from Australia. So my nights go pretty late. You guys are like one of the first calls I've got tonight. Like, whereas it's like evening here. And so I'm generally just absorbing a lot. And whenever there's a cool story or a cool thread, I can dig in. And then, yeah, I talked to a few really good writers as well, who cover stories and who have like really great insights into what's happening. And I think that's where I get the depth of my knowledge or information. But I mean, it's just like you find something interesting, or someone says something and it's like, wow, that sounds unique. Like, what's going on there? And you keep pressing and you find more and more and more. And you're like, wow, okay, this is a story I need to tell.
Caleb, a very important question I need to ask you. In a lot of, as you rightly said, the big, tech companies in Africa, your Jumias, Flutterwaves, we see a lot of the executives within these companies, or founders within these companies. When you look at their background, they normally have a background of going to uni either in UK or America, making it easier for them to sort of raise funds because they'd be closer to where the action is or where the part of gold is. When you raise money to go invest in, African, startups, what are the sentiments? What are the sort of, either pros or cons that investors, voice to you about sending money to Africa to go develop Africa?
I think it's a really interesting one because you think about venture, and venture really is a trust game. Like, the crux of all of it is like, hey, you're going to do something very risky, which is deploy my money into startups that most of them will actually fail. You have to have a lot of trust to give someone money to do something which is supposed to generally fail, right? And so it's like, how do you bridge that trust is a big question that I think African VCs need to answer. And there's a few things that like we can do as a whole to answer those questions, like get good returns, make sound investment choices,
100%.
like actually deploy like VCs and not like angels. Like that those are some of the things we can do to make sure that we do get that trust from from that economic level and the fund management level. There's a few other things which are like where essentially it's very hard to find people who are interested in investing in Africa and to garner that interest, right? Because a lot of the time they can think, well, maybe I'll wait later, or maybe I don't hear too much about it. I don't know that much about what's going on there. It's a bit of a black box. I went to Singapore, like, Australia and Southeast Asia have a good connection. And so I spent some time in Singapore last year. There was like virtually no interest in like what was happening in Africa, other than like, wow, that's really interesting. But people are like, oh, like there's these other markets that are becoming more normal and that are easier to understand and are closer, like Southeast Asia or like Latin America. And so harder for us as African VCs and founders. I think one of the things that I really think I can change with Tech Safari and part of our impact is that we can drive more investment into the continent because we're normalizing stories and we're normalizing like African startups being actually very incredible, exciting startups to support, right? I think information is one of the biggest barriers between, and that storytelling piece is one of the biggest barriers between capital flowing. Yeah, I think that's my take on it. I do think that we're in this weird dilemma where like, yeah, you're right. Like most of the founders have actually, like most the big founders that raise a lot of money, either they left the continent, studied, worked, and came back, or they weren't born on the continent. Like I'm one of them. I wasn't born in Africa, in Ethiopia, but I spent a lot of time there. But that gives me like kind of almost like privilege in the sense that I can use the fact, like, use my experience here and my expertise.
100%.
Like, yeah. And I think it's like, it's a weird thing because
but it's necessary. It's necessary.
Exactly.
Somebody needs to go to the promised land and come back and tell us, "Hey guys, it's green on the other side.
I got that money. Let's go. let's spend this money." yeah.
For good. I mean,
exactly. Yeah,
but
for good. and return
it's
that.
needed. It's definitely needed. Yes, and return
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
definitely, for the benefit of the continent. Okay. Now, I need your editorial hat on. Walk us through the current top stories that you're looking at, right? From the stories.
Oh
Go
man,
ahead.
okay, yeah. So let me pull the calendar up. So I don't necessarily. Sometimes I go by topical stories.
Okay.
Other times I go by just things I'm really intrigued by. So I'll start with the topical stories. I
Okay.
was really lucky, I guess, in that like I turned off my laptop on Friday, because I was burnt out and I wanted to stop writing and looking at my laptop, and I went away for the weekend. And I came back on Tuesday, and this whole Silicon Valley Bank thing had happened, and I had no idea
Yeah,
what had
there's
happened.
SVB
So
there.
there's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that. So I
Very
missed
big
all of
news.
that.
It's
So
all over.
I have nothing to say about it.
Okay, cool.
So I missed
Okay,
all of
cool.
it. But I did find interesting that like NASPA's recently shut down its
Yes,
foundry.
yes,
That was
that's a big
interesting
one.
news.
That's a very
And
big
I've been
one
thinking,
down here.
yeah. What's your take on that? Because I have a couple.
Look, I think, it's very interesting. And I think South Africa as a whole is in a very, particular point. For me, rather, my interpretation of it is, it really hampers the confidence of Southern African, startups, because, primarily
Mm,
NASPA's foundry was to invest in South African tech. So if a big, firm like NASPA's pulls out its fund, what is it? What message is it sending to sort of other international or continental VC firms such as yourself, to plow funds in South Africa? So I think that's the first thing. But at the same time, I think they're playing it very cautious in a sense that they say, no, we'll still plow funds into the startups we've funded, but we're not going to expand any further. We'll be looking at different parts of the continent, which is also exciting to see what other sort of areas of the continent they will be plowing into. But I think it's a balancing act. So there's both the pros and the cons, and I think only
mm.
time will really tell as we get more information. What was the intentions? What were some of the metrics and insights that NASPA's have or NASPA's got in making that decision?
Yeah, totally, totally. And hopefully we do get more data and insights on that. I think we have this really cool community as a part of Tech Safari called the Safari Club, where we just talk about what's happening in African tech, and had some really cool insights and some, a few questionable things around how the fund was run anyway, and like who all the executives were, all that, which is interesting. But what I do find interesting is Naspers as a company has an incredible story in like how Chris Becker,
Chris Becker,
he bet on Tencent, right?
100%.
And he totally won, like he smashed. It's one of the best returns ever. But in winning and like building, kind of having all this money to manage, their fate is tied with Tencent, right? So like Tencent is still, I forgot what percentage it was, but it was something like, it was definitely over 80, like around definitely over 70% of like their money
76,
is
like
still
76%. Yeah,
yeah, tied up in Tencent. And so it means that their fate is
100%.
tied to Tencent. And so if Tencent's failing,
100%.
which, their stock price has decreased, then they're in trouble. And we've just seen them lay off 30% of their staff. So
100%.
it's almost like this thing that's now a curse. And I think it's a very interesting story where like amazing growth story, and now it's like has pretty hard realities for the company.
Brother Caleb, it was so refreshing talking to another African that's based, overseas, and sort of understanding the narrative and the sort of things that the world speaks about us. We're in Africa, so we're always looking at ourselves within ourselves, but it's always good to get a perspective from an African that's, that has a much more objective view of the continent. And I love your optimism and your problem solving, perspective of, no guys, this is not doomsday. We're in the continent. We're going to deliberately, intentionally invest in the continent. And as you said, where there's problems, there's also a lot of capital and a lot of, gains to be made. So we definitely share those sentiments. So with that, thank you so much, Brother Caleb. Thank you for listening to iAfrikan Bytes. Please share your feedback with us on our socials. On Twitter at iAfrikan, on LinkedIn at iAfrikan.com. And check out our other podcasts, The Tefo Mohapi Show, Take Legal Matters, and The Lead Creator on all podcast streaming platforms. And also make sure to head over to www.iafrikan.com. That is iafrikan.com/radio, and subscribe for notifications. iAfrikan Bites is an iAfrikan media original show. Produced by Nzalo Mbangana, content producer and host Baton Kotokwane, and content manager Machabe Mabuna.